Okay. Right. Hello and welcome, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this evening's Association for Art History's first live digital event, which will be focusing on writing about art. This is the first in the series of digital conversations and workshops that will be focusing on how to write about art from different perspectives and for different purposes. My name is Claire Davis. I'm the Deputy Chief Executive at the Association for Art History. I'm delighted to welcome Tabish Khan, who today is going to be talking about writing about art and exhibitions from the perspective of the art critic. Tabish has been visual arts editor for Londonist since 2013 and contributes regularly to other publications and events. He will tell you more about himself shortly. So, for this evening's informal conversation, it's going to last 20 minutes, after which we will have a chance to ask Tabish questions. If you pop those questions into the chat box, we will do our best to answer those and respond possibly throughout the conversation. If we don't get a chance, we might pick some of those up on Twitter afterwards. Please remain on mute and turn your video off. We're going to record this event and make it available afterwards. And I'm going to try to stick to time, stick to script. And so, yeah, without further ado, hello, welcome Tabish. Could you start by telling us a little bit more about what you do and how you got started?
Yes, well, thank you for having me, Claire. So my name is Tabish Khan. For those who want to share any of this on Twitter and Instagram, I am at London Art Critic. So Claire gave me a wonderful introduction into who I write for, which is for Londonist primarily. So where did I start? So I started not in somewhere a bit unexpected. So I graduated in biomedical sciences. So I spent a lot of time dissecting dead bodies. Apologies to anyone who's eating this while they're watching this talk. That's where I started. And then afterwards, I didn't have a clue where I was going. And I stumbled into a career in the energy sector, which is still my primary income in terms of career-wise. So the secondary career in art started when, as most people who work in a corporate job do, I was commuting on the London Underground, or those working in London. And I would look up at the adverts, and you would see those adverts that say exhibition at Tate Modern, exhibition at Wallace Collection, exhibition at Wellcome, a science museum. And I thought to myself, you know what, I don't really know much about art and exhibitions aside from a few visits to them as part of a school trip. And my family are not, and my wider friends and family aren't that into art and exhibitions. So I thought, why not take a punt and go and see some of these? So I started going, I started thinking, it's great, it's eye-opening, it's mind-expanding, I want to see more. And I got a bit of a bug. And then a cousin of mine said, well, you should write a blog, back when blogs were still relatively new. And so I did, and then I looked for somewhere to get it more coverage, and that's when I came across Londonist, who were largely volunteer-led in terms of the people who wrote for them. So I joined unpaid, and the irony being that Londonist today is a very professional outfit, and they would have probably said no to someone as amateur as I was back then. But I caught them at the right time, and I've been writing for them for 8 years, also been writing for Fad magazine. And one of the nicest things is those tube posters that started my journey now occasionally will have something like 4-star or 5-star Londonist on them, which is from one of my reviews. So it's really lovely to see my story come full circle.
Thank you very much. That must be very nice, actually, seeing like those stars and comments.
Well, yeah, if you ever see a man like who looks a bit like me taking pictures of tube posters, you'll know why.
So you've been an art critic now for a number of years. Do you feel that you have a different voice or a different perspective to other art critics? And does that make your type and style of writing unique?
Yes, well, I hope so. I suppose the way to think about it is in art, there's this term that is outsider art. So outsider art is anyone who is not formally trained in art from a school or university or through an apprenticeship. They've just come across art naturally. So I would classify myself as an outsider art critic, because the way you naturally become an art critic is you either go through an art history route or a journalism route, or both. And I've got neither. So, I came at it very fresh. And you do get a little bit of imposter syndrome, as something that most of us experience some point in our lives. So yeah, it was strange for me doing that. But then I also think that by having one foot outside of the art world and one foot inside it, I've got that slightly different perspective where I can be looking at it from the outside in. And that's why there's the joke amongst my colleagues at Londonist, and it's now spread a bit more, is to refer to me as the people's art critic, for that very reason, in that I am seeing many more shows than the average person, but I'm still one of the average person rather than one of the, I don't know, the art establishment. So that, I think, ensures that I write in a very, I wouldn't say a populist style, but very much in an accessible style. So, because, if you ask me who I'm writing for, I am kind of writing for want of a better word, the Tabish Khan in waiting, that other person who hasn't discovered art just yet. And I'm hoping that by reading what I have to say, that they will suddenly decide, oh, maybe I want to take a chance on art and go see some exhibitions.
I think that term, the people's art critic, is such a great. You must feel so flattered to have that kind of reputation that's now kind of going outside of your own Londonist office.
Yes, well, I should point out that all art critics, to be an art critic, you have to have somewhat of an ego. And it's always nice to be referred to the people's art critic, even if it does sound a little bit socialist.
I think, so I suppose so how does writing about exhibitions, do you think, sort of differ from other forms of writing about art? I mean, you sort of touched upon it before, like, for instance, do you have a type of reader or audience in mind when you write?
Yeah, like I said, I would love for people within the art establishment to read what I write, but I'm also writing for those people who aren't, so au fait with it. And, I think there's a problem with art in the sense that if you look at the arts, as in art forms generally, so I'm including things like film, theatre, dance, opera, visual art. Visual art actually has the lowest barriers to it, because there's usually a lot of visual art everywhere in most cities and towns. A lot of the time it's free, right? So given that it's free and there's not many barriers to it, it still doesn't have the level of visitors that you get for another medium, say cinema. And cinema, you always have to pay for cinema, with a few exceptions. And yet there's something like over 70% of adults will have visited a cinema theatre in the last year or so, COVID accepted, of course. And art, it's about 50%. And for minorities, it's even lower than 50%. So I think amongst Asian, it's about 40%, and amongst Black, it's 33%. So I'm hoping also to draw in those kind of people who wouldn't be normally attracted to art. And it's not just an ethnicity thing as well. It's very much middle class pursuit. It's seen as art. And there's a lot of not working class people going to exhibitions. So I'm hoping that by writing about art in an accessible way that relates it to the every person in the street, that they will then visit.
Yeah, I think it's very strange with art, like what you just said. It's so you should be able to just walk into a museum or gallery, but there's somehow that kind of barrier, which is yeah. So I'm going to try to keep to script so I don't run over. So at the moment, you write for online content, mainly on online content only. Do you think that there's a difference between writing for online and writing for print?
Yes, I do think there's a difference. I think there's a difference in audience. It tends to skew younger when you're going online versus print. But I also think there's a lot more things vying for your attention. So, you know, when you read something in a newspaper, you don't have flashing adverts next to you or things trying to click to you. Or if you're looking at your phone, you don't have notifications pop up, which you do on a phone. And people tend to actually skim a lot more online. I've noticed that myself. If I'm reading an article that has a reading length of maybe 4 to 5 minutes or more, I'll find myself sometimes skimming if it doesn't grip me. And probably something I shouldn't admit, but even for fellow critics who I admire, I might skim through their reading as well. But I think there's also a sense of that's not necessarily the case. I think as long as people know what they're getting in for. I mean, one of the things that I quite like about online is a lot of longer reads have now started putting a time at the top to tell you how long it would take you to read this article. And with that sort of signal, I found that even for really lengthy reads, I mean, I was mentioning to Claire as we were preparing for this talk that there's an article I read, I believe it's in the New York Times. It's nothing to do with art. It's called Deliverance at 27,000 feet. And it's about people who climb and die on Everest and what happens to those bodies and how they're recovered. A rather macabre subject, probably harking back to my biomedical days, but that's a 60-minute read, which is a very, very long article. I mean, that's almost like a novella in itself. And I was gripped for 60 minutes reading that on my phone. So I think with the right writing and the right signals, I think it doesn't have to be all about skimming online. But for my writing, I tend to keep it to about 400 or 500 words for reviewing an exhibition, because that seems to be roughly the attention span. And it's always quite hard to write shorter than longer. I feel like it's easy to write lengthy prose about the big exhibition, because I could go on forever. But to keep it short, you have to really think about what does the reader want to see.
Yeah, I think that always writing short text, short copy is a lot harder, and trying to get people straight in and, like you said, engage them and then keep them, obviously not for 60 minutes, but you know. So I guess sort of with that in mind, when we read a Tabish review, 5 stars, how do we know that you've actually been to the exhibition? So how do you write about the exhibition and the works? Like, what's your approach?
Well, it's funny that you say that, because I remember someone ages ago when I first started writing made some comment that they didn't think I'd been to the exhibition. And I was kind of shocked and a little bit offended, actually, but I didn't realize that that's actually a common thing, that sometimes you will read articles from people who haven't been to see the exhibition. So I always go to see the things that I write about, unless I'm previewing, obviously. But when I do go, it's that sense of, you know, people want to know what you felt and thought. What is your overarching feeling or thought about this exhibition? That is the main chunk of a review. I mean, listing out reams and reams of all the works on display, I mean, that's what the exhibition catalog is there for. You know, that's not what people want to know. They want to know, how does this exhibition make you feel? And even if they disagree with your end opinion, there almost has to be enough there that they can say, actually, Tabish gave this a 1 star, but I disagree with him. I think I'm going to go see it because what he's told me appeals to me. And I think that's what you want to capture, that even the people who disagree with you will still find enough to go see. And like I was saying earlier, getting that down to 400 or 500 words is actually not an easy task.
No, I don't imagine that's an easy task at all. And actually, it's really interesting you say that it's the feelings, because sometimes, like, if I read a review, sometimes I almost feel compelled, you know, if it's that bad, I almost feel compelled to go, because it's like, how, God, it's sort of almost like a challenge.
Yeah, well, I said that to my editor once, which is that my 1 star reviews will drive far more people to an exhibition than my 3 stars. Because people think 3 stars, it's on the fence, but 1 star, I mean, why is this person so upset? And And also that thing about art is the difficulty is also it's almost purely subjective. Like if you're reviewing something like film or dance or opera, there are certain standards and they're quite neatly boxed in to some degree as to what you can do with those mediums, while art is all over the place. So there is a lot of subjectivity, and that's why some people I've spoken to would feel more comfortable reviewing film than they would art, because with art they think, well, where do I start? And I think that's why that what you feel matters more, because there is that 100% subjectivity, and that also means is it's the reason why you find that critics will generally not always agree on art while they would on something like film, because there's such a level of subjectivity to it.
Yeah, so I'm going to go slightly off script now, but so I'm interested. I'll go back onto script. Fine. So what would make you, because now I'm obviously interested in your 1 stars, naturally. What would make you, what has made you in the past sort of give something a 1 star?
I mean, a few things that I've given 1 stars to is generally not that I think that the quality of the art per se is poor, though that might be part of it. It's more the sense that it's what sometimes referred to art for art's sake. This kind of art that's been made that only if you're an art insider are you going to quote get it. And I don't like that. The fact that, oh, well, if somebody who studied this artist's work for years comes up, they'll strike a chord. They know how to engage with it. Done. What I want exhibitions to be is that if someone who doesn't know anything about this artist walks in, they can get to grips with it. And that doesn't mean that art has to be dumbed down or simplified. Art can be complex, but you need to let people into it. You need to give them an access point. If you think about things like, I mean, the people I often cite are New Scientist, who are a magazine who are designed for the average person who's interested in science. They're dealing with very complex things like quantum physics, for example, and they don't always succeed, but they try and write it in a way that slowly gets you into it. Yes, you'll have to read a few pages, but you'll get there with enough effort. Well, there's a lot of art exhibitions I've been to. The one that I always cite is the one called Conceptual Art in Britain at Tate Britain, where the wall text was covered with what's often known as art speak or international art English. And that just confuses people and puts people off. I put myself in that position of, let's say I was someone who hasn't been to an exhibition and I thought, conceptual art in Britain, I don't know a lot about conceptual art. Maybe I'll pay the ticket price to go see it. And then if you wander in and all you're confronted with is lots of text about, using words like didactic and liminality and ontological, I think the first thing you're going to think is, oh, well, that was a mistake on my part because this is not designed for me. And that really shouldn't happen. Nobody should feel that, it's okay for people to engage with art and say, you know what, I understand it, but I don't like it. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that. It's perfectly acceptable. But I don't like it when they've got some blockers that mean you just can't even get to that point and you just walk away frustrated.
Yeah, I know you and I have spoken quite a lot about some of these things, and I suppose it sort of links with the next question around, sort of pet hates, things that you never do in your writing, because I suppose accessibility, accessibility in that sense that, yeah, it's okay for you to be here, you're welcome. Yeah, so yeah.
And I also think about things such as, I talked about inclusivity earlier, and I've seen it so many times. I mean, I've been to private views, which are, the opening of exhibitions. I mean, first point I should point out is I've got to hang up with the word private view. If there's not a guest list, it's not private. Don't call it that, because it just tells people that I don't belong there, who aren't familiar with how the art world works and all its trappings. But I've been to, say, exhibitions off Brick Lane. Now, Brick Lane, for those who will be familiar, who aren't familiar, is the heart of the Bangladeshi community in London. And you go to these exhibition openings and it's all white middle class folk. And you think, well, how can that possibly be when 50 meters away there are loads of Bangladeshi people hanging about, but none of them are in this gallery? And same with Brixton. You know, Brixton's very multicultural. And likewise, I'll go to a gallery opening and it's all middle class white folk, which is, you know, it shouldn't really be that way.
No, it should not be that way. I think that's something that everyone can agree on. So we're doing pretty well time-wise, and I've noticed that there's three comments so far. So how has your writing changed over the course of your art critic career?
Well, I'd hope first and foremost that it's got better. You know, that's what I'd hope. And hopefully I've learned a lot from editors, because, you know, I've had editors who are, as for want of a better word, proper journalists. They've taught me certain things, and that's helped. And you know what, there was I talked about imposter syndrome, say 10 minutes ago. And that's another thing that came out, which was that when I started writing, I was thinking, you know, let's look at the people who are getting published a lot. So you had like the late now Brian Sewell, people like Adrian Searle, who writes for The Guardian, Valdemar Janczak, who writes for Time, some of the biggest names in art writing. I always pictured like, well, how can they be like more like them? Because obviously they're successful. And then it took a while for me to get to a level of confidence where I think, actually, you know, the world doesn't need another Adrian Searle. It's got him. You know, what it needs is a Tavish Khan. But what does that mean? You know, how do I find my own voice? So, you know, it's fun experimenting with things. I try to, you know, put humor in them. People don't like it in the art world, but you know what? The art world's stuffy and deserves to have its feathers ruffled occasionally. And also, you know, sometimes try and be more creative. One of my editors still thinks my best piece, according to her opinion, is there was a V&A exhibition about Winnie the Pooh. So it was about Winnie the Pooh and the stories. And my review was written in the style of a Winnie the Pooh story in which Piglet and Pooh go to the V&A to see an exhibition about themselves. And she loved it, and she thought, and it got a lot of reach. And, you know, that sort of creativity and experimentation doesn't always pay off, but it's always good to try.
Yeah, I think again, it goes back to just that sense of being human. Like, you know, there's a human experience, and I think if you're a human being talking about an experience you've had and the feelings and thoughts that you've had, and that is what's going to connect in your writing with people reading it, because they're human as well. So I'm going to end with this question, and then we can see if there's questions from the audience. What would be your sort of top 3 tips for writing about art for aspiring art critics and writers?
Yeah, so I mean, they're not going to be anything spectacularly new, but hopefully what you're expecting. So number 1 is write as much as you can. You know, only through writing more and more do you actually get to the point of learning what works, and experiment a little bit, try different things. Doesn't always pay off, or, you know, doesn't, just because something is poorly received doesn't mean it's poorly written. It could just be a different audience that maybe it's not reaching. And obviously now today, with everyone having easy access to a blog, that's a lot easier to do. And, you know, don't be scared of publishing things. You might get some negative feedback, that happens, but that's just par for the course. So just get comfortable with that. Second thing I would say is get comfortable with all the things that sit around writing, because more and more, I mean, I'm an example of writing not paying my bills. You know, there's less and less money in writing, which is upsetting, but that's the nature of it. So just get familiar with all the things such as social media and how to make the most out of it and share your writing, how to make the most out of having your own website, how to get comfortable with other things that sit around writing. So hosting panel discussions, hosting talks like this, you know, doing talks. I mean, it takes a while, you know. I mean, I used to be very unfamiliar with talks and less confidence and more conscious of how I was behaving on screen, and now I've got more used to it. And even in lockdown, I'm having to learn things like always look at the camera, because that's where you make eye contact, don't look at the screen. But things like that, you learn as you go along. And the final one I would say is not all the best writing is in art, right? Look wider, read widely, read as many articles as you can. What works in, say, writing about social history, what works in writing about food. And if you get a chance, do try and write about other things. I have written about food and theatre, which is opportunities Londonist has given me. And that kind of opens your eyes. And I've also written about wider things. I mean, we were talking about negative feedback. I mean, the most negative feedback I got was I wrote a piece called "Why Uber is the Best Thing for Black Cabs," and that angered a lot of black cabbies on Twitter who came after me. But that was entertaining anyway. But yeah, those are my 3 tips. Kind of write as much as you can, get comfortable with all the other things that sit around writing, such as social media, and try writing and reading about things wider than art.
Thank you. I would probably add to that as well. I've learnt something from you saying look at the screen and look at the camera, not the screen, which I've been doing probably a lot. And also get a vanity lamp, because now I've gone very dark. Thank you. Right, I'm going to see if I can scroll through some of these comments and questions. So there's one here from Meg. Why do you choose or apply a rating? What do you believe the rating does for you and the reader?
Yes, so that's an interesting one. So thanks for that question, Meg. So Londonist didn't used to have ratings, and I didn't write with ratings. And then we changed to have ratings. And I think it's a contentious one, because some people feel that the thing that I mentioned about tube posters, you don't appear on tube posters unless you apply a rating. So therefore you should. But I think it also helps in the sense of people know what they're getting out of it. In the sense that even from reading someone's writing, it's actually quite hard sometimes to determine what the person actually thought of it. And the rating does help if you just want a one-liner of like, is this person saying I should go to it or not? Because I've read reviews and not known what they were talking about. So that helps in that sense. But there is that constant tussle about whether we should or shouldn't, and we do. But elsewhere I've written they don't. So it varies from publication to publication. But it's more an editor's decision rather than my own. So we do, editors and I have had quite a few back and forths on ratings. We like Tab, that doesn't read like a 4-star, you've given it 4, it reads like a 3. And then we'll go back and forth and discuss. They'll never change it without my permission, but we'll have spirited discussions and then land on the correct star rating. Well, whatever star rating we land
on. Okay, so we've got one here from Jessica. Tavish, do you have any tips or advice for artists writing about their own work?
Yeah, thanks, Jess. On that side, I would say that, there is, writing is a skill. So sometimes there is a benefit, but you as an artist need to weigh this up personally around whether it's worth asking someone to write and pay them for it. Obviously, you've got to think about the costs and whether it's worth it for yourself as an artist, but, sometimes that helps. And if you're not doing that, if you're writing yourself, I would say also, try and keep it short and sharp. Try and keep it, avoid the art speak if you can. Also get other people to look at things, because, as an artist, you're invested in your work in a way that someone who is coming to it cold won't be. So often it's helpful to ask others to look at it. So for example, one thing I've said to artists is when you've got your website and you've got the big splash image, which is the main header image or the hero image, as it's sometimes known, don't be the person who chooses that image, because you as an artist have a different investment in different works. You might think, I worked 3 years on that work and therefore it matters more to me, but that might not be what grips people when they land on the website. So find a trusted friend who can tell you, or loved one who can tell you that's how you do it. Or feel free, always get more and more feedback from other people if you can.
Okay, here's another one here from KS. What resources do you turn to most when you're writing about art?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one. Now, thanks to the internet, we've got more resources at our fingertips than ever. I'm not saying it's always the greatest of resources, but we have it. So I always try and do a little bit of researching on the artist before I go. But then I also feel that I'm in that sort of two minds about the more I know about an artist, the more I can educate the reader, if that's what I'm looking to do. But at the same time, I also want to come at it cold to avoid that mistake that I mentioned last time, which is you you go in assuming so much about the artist that you have a different experience that the average person would have. Now, I appreciate the more and more time I spend in art, that's always going to start to separate apart. And holding on to that will always be a juggling act. So that's what I try and do. I try not to read other people's reviews because I don't want that coloring my review before I write it. I might read it afterwards. But because I'm writing short and snappy reviews, I tend not to need to access too much historical resource. Even if I might do that afterwards for my own interest, I might not do it for a review.
Thank you. We've got quite a lot of questions, so I don't know how long you want to kind of respond to questions for, and how long people are sort of happy to sort of hang out for. But I'm happy to sort of keep this open and chatting. I'm also going to see if I can find. I think some of the questions are sort of quite long and might require a bit more sort of feedback. But here's one from Lucy. Who says, what is your opinion about the reduction in time and money for many schools across the country for art? Would you have liked to have studied art history or art at school yourself?
Yeah, I mean, do you know what? It's an interesting because I've never actually gone back and studied art history. Maybe I should. Maybe I'll have to learn something myself. I probably will learn a lot actually. Think about school, and I think that's tricky about schools and art because they are cutting a lot of money for arts, and I think there is this view that art is not a sort of an economic powerhouse, which a lot of reports have done by smarter people than I have disproved, and you know how much the money the museums bring in and so forth, and not just visual art, wider arts. In terms of art history, so it's really interesting art history because, as you guys know, as I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, I didn't know anything about art until I was well into my 20s, right? And so if you had asked me before that, what is art history? I'd have probably said, you know what, I only know it as that subject that toffs study at private schools. You know, didn't Prince William do art history? You know, you think about art history being this thing that only, you know, people only study art history if they're also studying classics, as it were. You know, it's that kind of thing. And that's quite sad that it's seen as this sort of elevated thing, you know, you need to know Latin to study art history or something. You know, it's not. But I think that is quite sad that it's only seen at those schools. And I don't know, I mean, you know what, I'm not an expert in education, so I can't really talk about how you bring that into more sort of comprehensive schools. But I'm sure there are smarter people than I who can answer that question, or maybe Claire can answer that question because she knows more about art history than I do.
Thanks. Well, I'm going to plug one of, there's a new online art history A-level that people can sign up to do if they really want to, which we've done. But no, I mean, actually art history doesn't just exist in those schools, but I think that's the kind of ongoing sort of perception of it. And I think that's why, like, the Association for Art History is very much about kind of broad, inclusive art history, and trying to sort of, you know, show that, demonstrate that, kind of champion that, work towards sort of policies and activities that actually show and support that breadth. So here's a question from Krista. Hello, I wonder about the practical aspects of getting those first pieces published. How a review that you write actually ends up in publication if you're like a new or aspiring writer. I mean, obviously you had a kind of lucky break at the right time in the right place with Londonist, but if other people are kind of looking to sort of do that now, do you have any suggestions or comments?
Yeah, I mean, so this is the bit where I probably get a little bit contentious because there's a lot of people in journalism who will tell me that you should never write for free, right? You should always get paid if you're writing. And unfortunately, I mean, as you can see, case in point with me, sometimes the entry point is writing for someone who isn't paying. And I know that's unfortunate, but that's often, if you can find someone like a proto-Londonist, someone who is in the space that Londonist was back then, relying on volunteers to write. There usually are a few about, and you have to do your research and look at who's writing about art. Google is your friend there. Then that might be a way in. I think the only thing I would always say about writing for free is that if you have to do it and if you can afford to do it, is just make sure that the balance is right, so that you're getting the experience and the exposure that you want out of it in exchange, rather than monetary value. So, for example, don't feel like you have to keep writing for free about things that you don't want to write about, because some people easily get sucked into that vortex, and that's something that should be avoided. So, yeah, often, unfortunately, that is the way in for writing. But there's no harm, obviously, writing for yourself to the point where people can see your writing and then maybe pitch to someone who does pay. I mean, that's another avenue where you're writing for free, but for yourself to start with, before you go to bigger and better things.
Thank you. I think so. We might do one more question, and then what we might do is then pick up on some of the longer ones on Twitter, because I can't read the longer ones.
Yeah. Do you want to share the Twitter handle, Claire?
Yeah, I will do. So if I ask you one more question, which is quite a nice question to end on, and oh, where did it go? Hang on. Here you go. Right, Tabish, if you could write a review about any artist's work in a theoretical exhibition, what would that be and why?
Do you know what? I saw this come up and I thought, I haven't got a clue. Genuinely haven't got a clue where to start with that. Because the thing is that wanting to see a work is different from wanting to review a work. Because what makes something exciting to review is not necessarily what makes exciting to see. So, for example, as much as I love works by old masters, they're not actually that interesting to write a review about, because a lot has already been written about them. So actually writing reviews about contemporary work is more interesting for me, because it is kind of, you don't come in with any preconceived notions, right? Even if you decided to turn your mind blank and went to see a show that featured work by Michelangelo, you can't come in without preconceived notions, because you know how revered he is. But with contemporary artists, you almost have this view that you are coming at it completely cold. So I might describe a few shows that I thought were interesting, and if something could look a bit like those, then maybe that would be what I'm after. I mean, this is a show that was maligned by a lot of people, but I liked it, so I want to put it out there. There was a show called The Invisible Show at the Hayward Gallery, where all of the work was invisible. And so all the concepts were really grand, and I quite enjoyed writing about it, in a sense that, so for example, one of the works was a plinth which had nothing on it, but the artist had a witch doctor from Africa hex the space above the plinth. And I just love the idea that, I'm a rational scientist person. I don't believe in hexes and I don't believe in curses, but I'm not going to put my hand over that plinth. And someone else who was in the exhibition did. And I did say to her, I'm like, if you step out that door and you get hit by a bus, then you've got no one to blame but yourself, right? So that sort of thing that really stimulates your mind, but it's very hard to visualize, makes for an interesting review. Because how do you review and write about something that's hard to explain and hard to see? So maybe that's a bit of a cop out, but that's my answer.
No, that's a really good answer. That's not a cop out. Right, I'm gonna wind things up now, and I'm gonna just say thank you very much, Tabish. It's been as ever, hugely enjoyable, hugely inspiring. Yeah, we will try and follow up some of these questions on Twitter. And you can find Tavish at London Art Critic, and you can find us, the association, at For Art History. Yeah, I think it just I did mean to put something up, but I've lost my screen share. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending this evening. And yeah, we'll pick this up on Twitter and hope to see you at another Writing About Art event soon. Thank you very much
for listening and watching.
Yeah, enjoy your evening. Bye.